I think I'll start recording as well. Welcome everybody to this class. This will be my first class that I've done as a CCP employee. I've done previously some classes on also fleet commanding and tactics, but that was like back in 2012, early 2012 in fact. I've been FCing for quite a while, a total of 5 years really, before I joined CCP, and I've participated in all kinds of wars as well as FCing a super capital fleet for DRF during a Northern Coalition fight. I guess that's a small introduction about me. Was also formerly CSM 6 member and Crudoy. So this class will teach you more or less how the fleet commander actually thinks. Hopefully I will give you this sort of trait of, look at the fights and look at them from fleet commander perspective. That's my goal for today. So, fleet commanding, I think a lot of you probably are familiar with some of the definitions that are already available on the E-UNI wiki. I'm probably not gonna go too much into detail for that because there's plenty of information on it already available. So, fleet commanding is basically taking control of X amount of people and giving them a goal that they will basically fulfill in the process of flying spaceships. Spaceships are serious business. This is why we seriously approach this, as you can see. So, fleet commanding and tactics. There are obviously different fleets for different purpose, and we're gonna cover like the main ones, being the CTA fleet, the home defense fleet, small roaming fleet, and we're also going to cover some super capital fleets and probably also Rubicon fleets that are in the not so distant future. So without further ado, let's see an example of a CTA fleet. Just going to post a link in lecture E-UNI. That's a very, of course, broad example of a CTA fleet. The CTA was meant for a particular goal. In this case, it was defending a system. As you can see, it's 460p. The fleet that was brought by Legion of Death, FC'd by UXDev, was basically comprised mostly of battleships until the escalation of capitals from Atlas Alliance forced appearance of Titans as well as dreadnoughts. Now, what you look at is basically normally that all fleets, big or small, they generally have the same type of damage dealers. This is for the sole reason of basically reducing the ground control that the enemy might have on you. So, for example, if you bring just Tempest fleets, it basically means that the enemy will be forced to use a particular fleet to counter it, or they won't have all, like, for example, jammers to counter it, or they won't have track disruptors, for example, for all the ships. Basically, because of the number of fleet members that you might have flying the same type. Also, it means that if one ship, basically you can also calculate the amount of damage you're going to be doing on the battlefield from fleet commander perspective. Simply because you all have the same fleet, you all have relatively same skills. That means the damage output will be 1 times the amount of people flying it. At the same time, your logistics will be able to obviously use one particular armor or shield repair to basically repair your fleet members, basically reducing the need for multiple tanking. Now, when the escalation happens, of course, that's when you bring out your biggest ships, your Morrises, you bring your Dreadnoughts, Titans, my other ships, and depending on the amount of that you're facing, you might want to either take it a bit slowly, as in first deploy Dreadnoughts and see if there's going to be a counter-escalation, or whether you have to actually just leave them there and not bring any supers of your own. Foolish FCs would normally bring all of their stuff and show their cards, show their hand right off the bat. which means they don't have anything to back it up, and if they don't, then they pretty much might lose all of their fleet altogether. In this case, Atlas, they brought all of what they could basically bring, all their dreadnoughts, all their motherships, all their carriers, to kill a Titan that was the only Titan at the time on the field, caught. And once they did that, the Legion of Death basically brought the rest of the Titans to Nyxes and more dreadnoughts. Moving on to a very small home defense. Home defense is very simple because you can bring any type of ship generally, unless UFC wants specific ships to counter a specific fleet that's in your home system. But generally, it's just another roaming fleet which comprised of either the same type of ships, for example, heavy assault ships, or recons, or it will be like Tech 1 cruisers that E-UNI flies, for example. So it will be pretty homogeneous as well. So you can basically bring up just either large ships to counter it, or you can basically bring any type of ship you want and just rely on numbers basically to kill them off. Sometimes it's actually a bad thing because a lot of small fleets nowadays who basically roam the enemy systems, they basically try to gang up on sole targets as well as trying to pull away from the main fleet and try to kill people who will run after it. For example, Naga fleets will align on micro-op drive and kill anything that's going to try and burn towards them. At this time, of course, if you are home defense FC and you see this kind of fleet, you basically have to rely on your core tops to give you point warpins, so you can basically get on top of them real quick with a dictator, bubble them, and don't allow any of them to escape. And then warp in, obviously, the main fleet on top of them. This has been one of the favorite tactics for PL when PL has a CTA or a small CTA to fight in a system. They would always bring at least 50 people to about 14 logistics ships. They would stay aligned. They will definitely warp around the system. They will try and separate the fleets and destroy them bit by bit until, unless they see that their reps are not holding. In that case, they might try different tactics, trying to basically run around the system a bit more. And again, to reduce the numbers of ships on the field and to confuse the enemy at the same time. Baiting plays a very big role as well in home defense fleets, as well as in some CTAs and some small roaming. So if you have a very tanky ship that has 1 or 2 points, warp disrupt points, he basically acts as a bait generally, and that person sends as a scout as well as a bait, and he will basically bring PvP to you. Especially if the enemy doesn't have any eyes on you, he will basically fall for it. And for example, drakes are very good baits. They also cost nothing. But there are also other good examples of baits. Even carriers can be a really good bait. Especially if there's a large enough fleet to fall for it. Thanatos, for example, can withstand in passive fit for a while before it's brought down by a gang size of 50 or 60 battleships, which means you have plenty of time to sign in a bigger fleet on top of them and kill them off. Of course, there are horrible examples where bait gone wrong. It will be when a ship doesn't have ozone and the player basically dies because of it without doing anything really. There's also examples of players being bumping off stations well aligned towards the target to warp in. There's been all kinds of mishaps, of course, when it comes to baiting. So as AFC, you have to have absolute knowledge of what ship you're trying to use as bait, what it can do, what can go wrong, and basically try and avoid that. An example would be, of course, if you're baiting with a Thanatos, make sure he has all the fuel that it requires for multiple signers, as well as for its own exit point. So it has an exit point, has fuel for that exit point, and basically your fleet has all the needed assistance for it. So logistics, it needs to be wrapped. Of course, when I started talking about trying to get you guys to think like a C, looking at killboards is definitely how you can train yourself to become so. Basically, getting familiarized with different setups, different ships, different tactics, and different ways of comprising your fleets with different ships to achieve specific goals. I mean, Burn Eden back in the day was using ships like Ravens with cloak for sole purpose of sniping tackled targets from a far away. So they would do that, cloak up, come to the system, come to a station, for example, at 100 cloak up, sit there cloaked up for a while until their bait basically gets something out of the station tackled, and then they decloak onto the end, fire on the aggressive target with cruiser missiles, so they will destroy it real quickly. As a small roaming FC, your main priority is not tactics, but rather calling targets. So you can see how this fight will end or how it will go when you jump into the system as a scout, or if you jump in the system, if your scout jumps into the system and tells you the composition of the fleet, of the enemy fleet, as well as stuff that can come on scan and land on the gate at the same time. So you make the call of what's going to happen, how this fight will play out. Will it even start playing out, or you will bail, or will you actually enter the system and you will hit the correct targets and reduce your own losses and get the kills you want, and basically help everyone enjoy, of course, the fight. For some FCs, the enjoyment of the fight comes with dying. So when everyone is dead, that's his operation success. Again, it depends what fleet commander sets as it's his own goals, as well as goals that are set by either alliance or corporation that he's in, depending on the situation that he needs to create goals for. So covering this is basically in a way of, let's say, so let me give you another link. So this time it's a link about a small roaming gang. Small roaming gang is up to really 20 people, plus or minus scout. So what we can see in this split is from friendly side there's Rage Alliance. From hostile side there's Legion of Death side, led by Geplev, who was an initial that died. Sometimes FCs do die. That's unfortunate, especially if the enemy has enough intel to know who's being the fleet commander for the fleet. Of course, there's backup fleet members and there's, of course, backup target callers, which is also something the main FC needs to be prepared for. So he needs people he can trust, people he needs to assign those type of roles, as well as scouting and intel gathering. So looking at this fleet fight, you can see that the enemy forces, the friendly forces lost 8 ships. The enemy lost 5. Given the amount of points, it's about double the points. And points in here are really ESC lost. So basically, the friendlies lost more in ESC than the hostiles. And the fight happened on a gate. And as you can see, the hostile forces comprised of zealots, while the home defense fleet of Rage comprised mostly of a mixture of hacks, heavy assault ships, recons. You can see some Falcons, Curse, and some Tech 1 DPS and Tech 1 battleships with ECM. So given the fact that Rage actually has a pretty decent gang, has lots of DPS, as control of having 2 Falcons, that's jamming, and of course Scorpion that also jams. Having all that control on the field and having 2 logistics, they managed to lose more ships simply because their fleet commander didn't call the right targets, although that can be debatable because the FC for Rage called targets obviously the fleet commander of the enemy force as well as their logistics. And that brings me to another point about logistics. Logistics can play a bait role as well as playing logistics role of just repping. It solely depends on how the FC actually positions them, as well as what are the commands given to them in the first place. For example, you can have 3 or 4 guardians who basically be sitting there repping each other fine, with no possibility for the enemy to break their tank. So they will act as a bait and basically buy the main fleet time to reduce the DPS that would have been otherwise directed at the main fleet's assets. For example, if zealots would die faster by far than all those 3 guardians. So those 3 guardians bought enough time for the enemy forces to reduce the amount of friendly forces, heavy assault ships, as you can see, Demuses, which deal a lot of damage up close, especially now since all the changes, they're dealing now more DPS. So reducing that, killing a vagabond, destroying falcons, so reducing control on the field as well. And basically they've done their job. Of course, this time there was only 3 guardians, so they didn't have enough for a full chain. But if you have like more guardians than this in your team, and you still have a decent amount of DPS, we must never basically or have more logistics than DPS. Of course, that never happens anyway. But basically, yeah, you can use logistics as a bait to buy you time, and as well as to rep your fleet. How could this fight gone any different? It could have gone different if the fight on the gate happened by initiation of the enemy forces rather than friendly forces. So in this specific frame, the friendly forces initiated first by basically landing on the gate in time when the hostile forces jumped in. So hostile forces didn't have enough time to relocate to a better position, basically go on to their optimal radius and basically stretch the enemy forces, given their numbers, to have a better position at defending their fleet and destroying the enemy fleet, the Rage Alliance fleet. So in this case, the fleet commander done it right. He basically, instead of trying to pick a defensive position, he went on to frontal assault, and despite killing those guardians, he basically managed to hold the field afterwards anyway. Holding the field, though, sometimes might not be worth it. You might have lost 30 guys to like 10 guys. You have the field to loot that, but that's still your loss. So holding the field is definitely sometimes not the goal. It's more or less a bonus for either side. Now let's see where else did I have zero preparation. Fleet type scout, fleet purpose scout, fleet composition covered, more or less. Constraints of different fleets. Constraints of different fleets are basically mostly in what people can actually fly. So if your alliance has a lot of members, that means they can mostly fly a lot of stuff, but a lot of the players have different ships trained, which means that unless you tell them all to train a specific fleet type ship, they're basically gonna bring all kinds of stuff, Drakes, Feroxes, just a mixture of any of that. For example, for a shield fleet. Of course, there's also different types of fleet for different goals. For example, if you want to have an ambush fleet comprised of Black Ops and stealth bombers, of course, also some recons to support that, you need people with high level skill to have Black Ops to begin with, and as well as people who specifically went for recons or stealth bombers as well. So that's of course as a constraint. Of course, another constraint of different fleets is that once you brought that fleet on the field, you cannot change, and I'll talk about this later. You cannot change your fleet, so the fleet who is, for example, in home defense, they can counter it. They can bring, if they have skillful enough pilots, so they can fly different types of ships, they can actually bring a counter to that fleet and ruin your day. or make it fun. It depends what UFC is into, losing fleets or winning fleet fights. Now, but this might be, you might change that very soon, because Rubicon, as you know, is bringing quite a few deployable structures. One of them is, of course, refitting module. I forget right now what it's called. I think it's mobile something. Rather changing. Basically, this will allow you to refit. What that means is that any member of your fleet has enough cargo space to hold one of those, can deploy it anywhere in the system, and refit his ship, providing his carries, modding some modules. That means that, for example, if you have assault frigate fleet, and you have your fleet micro warp drive, you can refit to a afterburner feed, so you can kite stuff better, so you can reduce the damage that you have by basically having a different propulsion module and orbiting a target with low signature radius that assault frigates have. You can also refit, your battleships, for example, to have micro jump drives instead of micro warp drives, if you're already in the system that you're fighting with. You can also fit clocks, obviously. You can basically refit your ship depending on how much space you have. So a future fleet might even consist, of a Viator or a blockade runner that would have, fittings for specific fleet to switch to a different fleet, because people might try and counter it, and then they will need to counter that. So it's going to escalate with people counterfeiting their ships, which is one of the great things that are going to come out in November. So next month we're hopefully going to see that being in play. Maybe even E-UNI one of the FCs from E-UNI might actually try that. Let's say the other thing is, of course, deployable signer jammers. That, of course, mostly comes into play in low sec for pirates, protecting themselves from being hot dropped. That, of course, is good for some small home defense systems. For example, certain renter alliance, for example, rents the space. They don't have the sovereignty for military upgrade yet to install a signer jammer or the like. They might want to, anchor one in a particular system they're right in, so they don't get hot dropped. Again, of course, that wouldn't work, I believe, for covered ops ones. So covered ops gangs will still be able to reign, but of course, those are very small examples, because there's still, for some odd reason, there's still a small amount of people who actually have the skills trained up for Black Ops and like to actually pull it off. That might change in the future. I really hope, because, if community still grows, people who joined last year, might have it trained up by next year. So things definitely change. And you probably have noticed it if you have been for a while, that fleets were mostly back in the day comprised of battleships. Those were the dreadnoughts. Then once people trained up for a while to have dreadnoughts, once they were released, there were like 1,000 dreadnoughts or something silly like that trained up in Gunswarm, for example, that they could deploy, which is a ridiculous amount and so on. And of course, during drone wars and while drones still dropped alloys, a lot of people built motherships and skilled their characters for motherships. So a lot of people had super carriers trained up, and that's what resulted with a lot of super carriers being deployed, large, big fights happening with, 500 or so supers or something around that being on the field. So, as the time progresses, you'll see more bigger stuff, obviously, more available for an average person to fly in. Now, another thing, of course, Rubicon brings is Bastion mode. Of course, that's only for Marauders, but given the specs that Bastion mode introduces and adds, of course, increasing I think tracking was removed optimal, I believe, as well as its tank. We might see some kind of crazy, fleets that will warping Bastion modded up, which is a very quick cycle, and will try and do damage while tanking together in one formation and running away. Of course, that particular example might only apply to tower bashing. In my opinion, at least, that's where this mode would be most suitable for, just like the Siege module. If I remember correctly, the mobile structure, so I'll read the question again. Can anyone use mobile structure? Is it pilot owner only? Those structures, I believe, at least the one for switching a fit, should be personal. It can be personal, corporate one possibly, but personal for sure. Basically, you should be able to use it to switch your own fit. Like an orca that can't move. I don't know if this example is actually really good, but it's a structure. So you anchor it, you put it in space, it's there. It can be on a safe spot, it could be on a gate, and you can basically change your stuff on the fly, which is, I think, something that people were looking forward for a long, long time. Or at least fleet commanders were looking for it. Tech 3, I think that's being worked on. But definitely it's something on everyone's mind, is basically having strategic cruisers being able to refit on those type of structures, as well as I think they currently already are able to do that in with normal ship maintenance array, I believe. Alright, moving on to more tactics, I guess. Tactics literally arise from two things. It's either your main goal, so you devise the tactics to fulfill a particular goal by fitting your ships, preparing your ships beforehand, or you basically think about the tactics of how you want to position your fleet, how you want to maneuver it on the spot, on the fly. Same thing applies to when you jump into the system and you devise tactics of how to win a particular fleet fight when you encounter an enemy fleet, or before you even encounter, when you enter the system. Examples of those, of course, outfitting particular type of ship, having all tempests with newts trying to go and hot drop Nix, for example, that will be neuted really quickly and killed by a small fleet, relatively small, like 10, 15 battleships. But because it's going to lose all its cap, it can't really do anything. So thinking of stuff like that is tactics. Jumping into the system, seeing a gay camp comprised of mostly Tech 1 cruisers, primaring mostly Blackbirds first and then moving on. That's also tactics, and that obviously helps you win the fight. Jumping to the system and scouting to see where people at, if they're all docked up, devising a plan on how to bait them out of the station for a fight. That's also tactics. And this can go very different ways. Example for it will be, I have my own personal example for it, and we've seen a particular pirate group use a Balgorn for their fights. So we decided to devise a tactic to try and bait that Balgorn out, so they would bring it onto the field so we can destroy it. For that, we, of course, baited it with 2 Hurricanes. But, of course, not every plane goes well, so one of the Hurricanes got bumped by the station, didn't warp to the other Hurricane that was already baiting and who was being attacked. So we lost the Hurricane without actually doing anything. So once the second Hurricane got untangled from the station, we decided, what the hell, let's just go. So he warped in, grabbed whatever target, the battle cruiser at the time, opened the sino. I jumped in the carrier. Of course, that means that the carrier already at 30% capacity. I start wrapping the Hurricane while working on the target that he already grabbed, and also spreading points on other targets, because they switch from the Hurricane onto me, start killing me, and shows up straight away, almost shows up a Balgorn to mute me so I can't wrap my Thanatos, as well as another carrier shows up later on to repair Balgorn because we all switched to it. So at this point we have me with no cap, barely keeping the point on the Balgorn, him being wrapped by a Thanatos of their own, and our Hurricane with a Cyno having only had one Cyno activation of Ozone in his cargo hold, which means he can't activate it anymore. So we're stranded, basically. I'm being attacked by 8 guys, including a Balgorn. Hurricane is not being attacked because, well, it's a Hurricane. So what happens is I pedal, and he pedals towards me, so I can give him Ozone so he can light up as another Cyno for a mothership. So we escalated it to bringing a mothership into a low-sec system in order to kill the carrier that's wrapping Balgorn. And then we switched obviously to Balgorn, killed the Balgorn, killed another set of battle cruisers and even a battleship that for some odd reason when the fight was over he warped in. Anyway, I guess the fleet commander didn't tell them to stop switching ships. So basically it was a treat. And of course we looted the field, and at the end of the day it was 1 Hurricane loss, and second Hurricane actually died. When he lit up the Cyno, they tried to kill the Cyno really quickly, and seeing as that character was, I didn't have any cap to wrap him, but the mothership that came in, his own mothership basically, he didn't try to wrap his own Hurricane, he lost that. So 2 Hurricanes were traded off for a total of 3 battleships, 3 or 4 cruisers, a Balgorn, and a carrier. And of course, this means that we were prepared to commit a mothership, we were prepared to commit a carrier as well, just, depending on the escalation, as well as having those initial bait ships to bring out a Balgorn, a very expensive officer fit Balgorn. Plural FCs. Is it counterproductive to have multiple FCs in a fleet? Sometimes it really depends on what particular communication device you're using, software you're using, sorry. For example, TeamSpeak used to be really good for it because of fleet command mode where you could whisper to fleet command. Currently you can do the same as well. Mumble has also whispering to different channels, which is also good. Basically, it allows you to have multiple FCs directing to different parts of the fleet. Because fleets nowadays are so big that you definitely need a secondary FC for your logistics, so they coordinate with that FC of where they need to be, so they anchor on him. They go to a particular spot, and that FC is responsible for the logistics not being caught, being there in the fight, and for the targets that are being wrapped. So, for example, prioritizing what targets need to be wrapped the most is what the logistics FC will do. The Stealth Bomber FC is also, of course, a part of that. It also depends which fight you're taking them to. If you're expecting a particular fight where you'll have enough bombs to kill a particular fleet, and you know that fleet will be sitting dark or in a position where you'll be able to destroy it with bombs, you definitely should get another FC basically to have a wing for stealth bombers. That of course depends on your alliance, the amount of force you have, the amount of the resources you basically have. What is the most annoying thing for an FC to do, and how can fleet members support the FC best? The most annoying thing, I guess, is preparations, scouting, and giving the point to warp in. Often what I found is that FC normally is responsible for doing all 3 at the same time, including scouting and intel. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, simply because of the amount of clients you have to monitor altogether, as well as coordinating the fleet at the same time. This basically splits your brain in half. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, having people you can trust, who can take those roles for you, who can give correct and adequate information about the enemy fleet, who can give you correct warping points, is the key. Because PL, basically Pandemic Legion, wouldn't be where they are without those kind of people, because those people who basically enable them to have good fights, to have good sense of what's going on with the enemy, have good warp-ins, so they're not stranded or they're not in a bind, basically. or they land on top of the correct target that they are looking forward to kill. These are the things that are very, very important for fleet fights. Even sometimes for small roaming gangs, they're really important. So fleet members definitely can help FC with this. Because somehow we ended up having 18 extra minutes, I guess. I'll round up with fleet commanding is a very interesting thing to do. It's very tactical, obviously. You basically devise strategies from from jumping into a gate camp to strategizing on how to take a particular region of space, which I have done in the past. So operating in a large sense of way of actually taking space, devising which particular systems or station systems need to be taken first to give you a better tactical advantage. Of course, at the same time, you might have to take part in the logistics of it, meaning moving ships, setting up towers. That, of course, another thing that Alliance members can help a fleet commander with. Besides that, I suppose fleet commanding is also all about knowing what you're doing, knowing your ships, knowing what they can do, knowing of course, what they can't do, knowing their basically faults. People like Tango fleets, but of course, the issue with Tango fleet is that it's rather slow. It can be caught and destroyed, and sometimes its limitation is that they use heavy missile launches, and those are 70 kilometers or so range. So you're limited by the engagement distance. So I guess questions?
So I have a question about interceptors. How do you think will the upcoming change the fleets and engagements on the gates?
Gosh, I forgot about that completely. Even though I'm actually looking forward to flying my Crow again. Yes, they basically with warp, as you know, they will be able to fly through mobile op disruptors as well as bubbles. So this will, of course, means that you can use them now again as good scout. You can definitely warp faster. You can catch up to fleets. Even if you have a nice squadron of interceptors, you can basically catch ships that are being bailing from engagement. So in the past, you'd see a lot of battleships trying to run away from another fleet, and it's just a never-ending. You land on the gate, they're jumping through, you jump after them, they're warping, and so forth and so forth. Same happened, of course, with the interceptors. We're also trying to catch them. And basically the whole fleet stretches through as well, but now you'll have, a particular set of ships that will be able to be faster. With destroyers will also be faster. The only thing I think will be slow is battleships warping, about the same as now. But cruisers shouldn't change, but everything smaller than a cruiser should definitely have a very good boost to them. So using them more will be very, very beneficial for FCs in Rubicon. And yes, Crows everywhere.
But this also means that battleships are again nerfed, or?
They're not particularly nerfed.
Compared to the smaller ships?
Compared to the smaller ships, in terms of warping, yes, but they're still battleships. You still can land them in time on the field. But your tacklers are now actually tacklers rather than just small, slow warping ships, if that makes sense. Battleships are battleships. You can see sometimes that it might seem like battleships lose their roles, with introduction with Tech 3 stuff, with Tangos and the like, which have, and Proteuses, which have huge tank while, still being cruiser size. Battleships still have very good roles to play. They still generally can be very tanky, very big and damage dealing as well. And they have a lot of slots that, in the utility slots, which make them very, very useful still. Again, it all depends on the purpose, on your goals of how you want to conduct your fights. Was Traps asking, if you have 70 AU warp and a battleship goes to warp and the scepter goes to warp 5 seconds later, will the scepter still land on the next gate sooner than the battleship? Yes, the answer is way sooner, because I really recommend you guys go to Singularity, providing your account wasn't expired like 2 weeks ago or something. Go to Singularity and check it for yourself. Just fly a frigate. It doesn't need to be Interceptor. It can be something as simple as Atron. You can see for yourself how quick the warping is. Also, beware motion sickness if you guys have it. Look away. A question about fleet invites. Sometimes pilots cannot join. What is the best solution? What do you mean they can't join? Is it because the fleet is full or because there's another issue? Hydra, can you clarify? It just happens sometimes. Well, that happens sometimes, then the best solution is to for the player to re-log in, I guess. Not sure why this happens. I think I've seen this happen before, once or twice. But yeah, it sometimes happens when possibly too many people very quickly joining the fleet. They can, of course, be invited manually if they can't use the link to join the fleet. But if all things fail, you can just reconnect really quickly and join the fleet then.
You haven't talked about one detail which Eve seems all about, which is spying and counterintelligence. Isn't that a very important topic for the FC? So I'm under the impression that besides Eve University, it's not the case there, but that FCs are trying to keep the targets and what's going on as tight as possible, and telling the fleet only what they really need to know. And sometimes this does not really work because, of course, people want to know what they are fighting for and what's going on.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I did mention it as Intel, just a general word for it. Wasn't really gonna talk much about it because we can't do it anymore. Nah, we can actually do it as spying stuff. Yes, there's nothing worse than being in a fleet where you sit there for hours and your FC just tells you 5 more minutes every half an hour, and all the main conversations about the intel of what's going on with the fleet all goes through fleet command channels, which, regular pilots don't have access to. I've been in those kinds of fleet. I've been spying in those kinds of fleet. And, it's definitely no fun. I know that you need to give people at least some idea of what's going to happen, or what you plan on happening, rather. That, of course, depends on the fleet commander himself, whether he wants to give you guys that information or not. The spies are very, very widely used nowadays, as you know, and you don't want to give too much information that a spy could tell the other. The spy could tell. That's why you shouldn't be using names for who your target callers are, for example, or your warpins. You should be always saying, in fleet, access in fleet, go to that, basically. So you minimize, basically, the exposure. Of course, if the person is already in fleet, but you can kind of guess who that might be if he's not with you. If he's not in the system, you might want to kick everyone out who is not with your fleet at the current location. There's other tricks of how you can spot spies and whatnot. For spies, on the other hand, you should be with the fleet so you're not spotted. I've been spying in Atlas and I've been spying in Northern Coalition, in TNT specifically. And when I was spying in Northern Coalition, I literally had never undocked even. And I was in the fleet, giving intel and on comms, but I never moved with the fleet ever. At the same time, that of course limits how much you know. Like, for example, if person says align and you didn't get like the broadcast, because you don't get the broadcast in station, you basically can't tell where they went to, at least. Or sometimes you they sometimes use, other tricks to basically confuse a particular spy, for example. So without being there with the fleet, you may not know much about it, of what's going on the field. But otherwise, yeah, spying is definitely what most big alliances use nowadays, including to get information who the fleet commanders are so they can take them down quick. So the fleet becomes in disarray. There's no target, if there's no target calling or any kind of movement or any communication going through, basically the fleet just, stands still. There's no focus fire, there's nothing, it's just dead. Which is why one of the main responsibilities for fleet command is to avoid that and trying to filter the information that's being passed on to the rest of the fleet in order to avoid this situation from happening. Does this answer most of it?
Yeah, thanks.
Sometimes the FC will hide the fact that you're going to a post bash. They'll be like, let's kick some ass. Well, something like that, and basically, set up, get logistics, get command ships, get recons, interdictors, one or two, let's go kill some enemies, and then you end up at the tower, and you're like, what am I doing here? Yeah, that happens. Yeah, FCs can trick you sometimes for the sake of alliance goals. Not sure what stripes, not sure what the deployable Signet Jammers range will be. What do you mean by range? So how far from particular celestial you can deploy it? Yeah, it should be grid. Just how good are sisters of each ships? I've seen some of the information for it. They're good. They're good and yeah, they're good. I mean, they're good looking to begin with. So definitely something to look forward. I'm looking forward to that. I know people who are running missions right now in Caldari space. Was it in Osmon? Yeah, in Osmon. They're definitely looking forward to cashing out the LP once those are released. Definitely think anyone should actually get at least a cruiser size because those are very, very good looking. The reason why I can't discuss specifics on Sisters of each ships because those are still being worked on by CSM as well. So those are not basically finalized to talk about. No, I'm afraid that I haven't had the chance yet to do that. I think I will have it in the future. I did have a chance to participate in the Luminaire fight, in Caldari Prime fight, when we had, dust fights going on the ground and a big capital brawl with players on the surface of the planet. Oh, well, on the orbit of the planet. Yeah, I took part in that, but so far I haven't had a chance to have a combined, factional warfare fight. Even though I've been to faction warfare just recently, I haven't had a chance to actually, get a dust player to give me a target and shoot it there from above. Just message CCP Garb to see where that picture is that he took. Of course, from experience, you basically get through seeing multiple different fleets at different time. You pick up, mistakes. A good FC will take those mistakes, analyze them, and try to remember try not to basically repeat them. I had a few very silly mistakes. How I remember seeing close battleship fleet, and instead of swapping over to a different fleet when I encountered a heavy assault ship fleet, I basically burned towards them. That was a big mistake. I'll put it this way. It was definitely a big mistake. Of course, that comes with knowing what constraints of different fleets are and what are their weaknesses. So, given that, you basically are able to determine what not to do. Mistakes can also happen when you didn't prepare. For example, if you forgot to ask the person who is the bait, please check, do you have the ozone for the signer, or check that all motherships have correct fitting, have correct amount of fuel to get you there and back. so you don't have a person who you have to leave halfway through the jumping because he ran out of fuel, or having waste time of somebody bringing it to him. There's all sorts of small things that can happen if you're not prepared. And what I've learned the most is that if you're prepared for anything, then you'll have the least to worry about. And that's so far been helped me a lot, and I had successful ops because of that. If you prepare for anything, you're bound to have the least amount of issues that could go wrong, as well as situations where you're like, oh my god, what is happening? I mean, there's been really silly things like sitting on a Titan, literally giving every pilot with a point a target that he will specifically hold on to, specifically a point. So having pretty much the same amount of people as the amount of pilots we were going to hot drop. And then the signal goes up, and there is no bridge because the Titan pilot forgot to transfer the strontium into the fuel bay. And basically, of course, everything just ran the hell away from that signal. And basically, my perfect plane was completely ruined, to say the least. All the Titan jumps instead of a bridge. Those, I still don't understand how that happens. Even after we changed the location for the buttons, people still manage to do it. And I think it's just because the person is not paying attention. I have never had that happen to me. And I've used Titans for quite a while, and they're still all alive. How effective are interceptors in fleet, and what are their roles? The roles primarily are to give you points, your exit points to run away from a particular spot, so you can also align to the interceptors that are moving, so you have a constantly moving spot to get away to. You can also use them to catch a particular ship. Obviously, it doesn't work for supers, but it works for most other ships. The interceptor roles in Rubicon will hopefully be exactly that, catching up stuff ahead, one jump ahead or so if you're chasing somebody, or at least being able to get them on the field very quickly from the gate, for example. So if you're sitting in a system, let's say you're shooting a tower, you have your support small ships as well as anti-support ships, which has zealots, for example, sitting on a gate or two different gates covering the entrance. So they will definitely not stop a particular fleet coming in to the system and trying to harass your main battleship fleet that's sitting on a structure, shooting it. You can have them, if something happens near your fleet, you can have them now rejoin the fight. So them warping in from the gate to you, back to you, will be now way quicker. So you don't have to sit there waiting, for your exit interceptor to come by. That, as well as their sometimes role is to make spots for you as well. Nowadays it will be even easier. Depends on the system though. Alright, I got the picture. Let's see, where can I upload it to?
Echo. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you.
Is there anything going on, or?
Yes, I'm just finishing up. Well, I guess 308 we finished. I'm just gonna post a picture of me in my Russian stuff. Because it's Halloween after all. And there we go.
Are you saying Russians are scary?
I don't know. Depends.
I would agree.
So as you can see, I had to do this in the office, so I was going to do it at home, but my video card died. Right, I guess that's it for the class, and thanks for having me here, and hopefully we'll come back with a different class to teach next time.
What class did you teach?
I think before that I was teaching on fleet and tactics, but before that it was something else. I think something related to towers even.